Imagine falling in love without phones, without photos, without even knowing what someone looked like beyond the shape of their shadow under candlelight. That was dating in the medieval world, if it could even be called dating at all. Because for most people, especially in the lower classes, romance wasn't a fluttering of hearts. It was a negotiation, a transaction, a matter of livestock, land, and survival. But even so, people still fell in love. Even in the dirt, even in the cold, even in the midst of plague, war, and arranged marriages, they still looked at someone across the field, or the feast, or the church pew, and something stirred. Let's begin in a village. You're a young woman of marrying age. Perhaps 16, maybe younger. Your father has already started whispering about potential matches. Not about love, but dowries. What can your family offer? What will they receive? The blacksmith's son has good arms, a full set of teeth, and a pig. The pig matters more than the teeth. Your mother warns you not to be seen alone with him. Not because she fears impropriety, but gossip. One wrong glance, one misunderstood touch, and your name could sour like milk in the sun. But you see him anyway. Maybe at the well, maybe during mass, maybe while he's splitting wood and you're pretending not to watch. He notices. You blush. It's small, but it's something. In noble families, things are more complicated. You don't meet a suitor by chance. You're introduced. Through letters, through family visits, through whispers between servants. Sometimes, you're promised before you can speak. Marriage is strategy. Love, optional. But still, somehow, it finds a way in. A glance across a banquet table. A secret poem slipped under a goblet. A dance that lingers a beat too long. These moments mattered. They were rare, dangerous, precious. And they were often the only moments lovers ever got. Because for most women, marriage was their future. And for most men, choice was a privilege reserved for the powerful. That's why courtship rituals developed, not just as romance, but as rebellion, as expression, as language. In the countryside, boys carved small wooden gifts, spoons, rings, charms, and offered them during festivals. A girl might wear a ribbon in her hair to signal her interest. If a boy plucked it, and she let him keep it, there was hope. At harvest feasts, games were played to mask flirtation. Chasing, hiding, stealing tokens. A laugh here, a touch there. All in public, all within bounds. But behind every innocent glance was a world of risk. Because reputation was everything. And losing it could mean losing everything. That's why lovers met in the in-between. In moonlight, in corners of fields, at the edge of forests. Not for passion, though it sometimes led there, but for privacy. For the chance to speak freely. To know one another. Because in a world ruled by silence, knowing was a rare kind of intimacy. In castles, courtly love blossomed, not in marriage beds, but in poems, songs, secret letters. Knights composed verses for ladies they could never touch. They pledged loyalty, fought duels, even went to war in their name. It was not about consummation. It was about admiration. The unattainable woman, the suffering knight, a romance of distance, of longing, of imagination. And it influenced generations. But for the average person? Dating, if you could call it that, was simpler. And stranger. A boy might leave flowers on a girl's doorstep. She might respond by leaving none the next day, or 3. If they danced at the May festival, and she didn't pull away, that was something. If he helped her carry water from the stream, and she didn't scold him, that was something too. Small gestures meant the world. There were no declarations, no text messages, no profile pictures, just effort, and time, and presence, and the quiet hope that someone might choose you. Not for wealth, not for land, but for the way you smiled when they sang. Of course, not all love was gentle. Many marriages were forced, many unions unhappy. Some girls were wed before they understood the word. Some boys were pressured into homes they didn't want. And in those homes, love had to grow slowly, or not at all. But sometimes, it did. After years. After shared loss. After holding hands when the baby wouldn't sleep. After watching the fire die together in the same silence. That, too, was a kind of love. But before all that, before vows and veils and village bells, there was courtship. Strange, awkward, slow, and filled with rules. If a boy walked a girl home, he stayed 2 paces behind. If he gave her a gift, she couldn't accept it immediately. If she did, She wasn't allowed to smile. Too much eagerness made people talk. And people always talked. There were traditions for every stage. In some regions, lovers exchanged trysting stones, small rocks kept under pillows to keep dreams of the other vivid and safe. In others, they embroidered small verses into cloth and traded them during holy days. Some communities held bundling rituals, where a courting couple lay together in bed, fully clothed, under strict supervision, to talk through the night. It was meant to build trust, or test temptation, or both. Not everyone followed the rules. Some lovers ran away, eloped, hid in barns or fled to distant towns where names didn't follow. But the risks were great. Disownment, punishment, sometimes worse. Still, they risked it, because love, even in the mud, still burned. Even under veils and rules and silence, it still whispered. And now, centuries later, you swipe, you scroll, you message, you meet, and maybe, just maybe, you forget that love has always been awkward. Always uncertain. Always half hope, half fear. But in the dark, under the same stars that watched the girl at the well and the boy in the orchard, you still wait, still wonder, still wish. Close your eyes now. The story isn't over. It's just beginning. There's more to say about how they loved, how they lost, how they touched each other's lives with nothing but candlelight and courage. But for now, rest. Let their footsteps fade into the grass. We'll follow them again soon. In a world without dating apps, dinner reservations, or romantic getaways, the medieval idea of courtship had to be stitched into everyday life, quietly, carefully, and often in plain sight. Because for most people, love wasn't private, it was public. Everyone knew when two people were walking a little closer than usual. When someone lingered too long at the market stall. When two voices hushed just a little too quickly as someone passed. The village watched. Not always cruelly, but curiously. Because love was rare. Not in feeling, but in freedom. And those who managed to find it without scandal or shame were often admired in silence. In some places, the seasons shaped romance. Spring was the time of new beginnings and weddings. Summer was full of labor, long days, and shared work, where love grew in glances and sweat. Autumn brought harvest feasts, music, cider, and excuses to sit close by the fire. And winter? Winter was for letters, for carving names into wood, for leaving signs in the snow. It was too cold for wandering, but not too cold for wanting. Some would tuck tokens, tiny charms, bits of ribbon, dried flowers, into the cracks of someone's doorframe. No name, no expectation, just a quiet gesture, a whisper instead of a shout. In castles and courts, the rules were different. There were tutors, chaperones, and strict codes of conduct. But under the surface, the language of love still thrived. A dropped glove, a held gaze, a handkerchief, forgotten, on a bench. Every object became a message. Every pause, a possibility. Court poets wrote ballads about forbidden longing. Young nobles read romances in secret. Pages carried notes hidden in bread or sleeves. It was dangerous, exciting, and utterly intoxicating. Even when marriage was arranged, some couples managed to write their own beginning, beneath the rules laid out for them. Because while the families plotted estates, the heart plotted escape, and sometimes, they met in the middle. There's a story from 14th century France of a noblewoman who was promised to a lord twice her age. The night before the wedding, she climbed from her chamber window and ran barefoot through the orchard, where a stable boy waited. They vanished together, their names lost. Their story not, because stories like that always linger. In taverns, love found a different rhythm. Bolder, louder, riskier. Men sang for women who never asked. Women played coy, daring glances over their mugs. Sometimes it ended in laughter. Sometimes in slaps. But now and then, in something softer. In an arrangement made not by wealth or blood, but by firelight and curiosity. The songs that filled those spaces weren't about battles. They were about hearts, heavy ones, hopeful ones, and hopeless ones, too. Traveling minstrels carried those songs from town to town, spreading stories of brave love, broken hearts, and promises made under stars. People listened, and wondered if their own life could one day become a verse. But back in the villages, among fields and fences, dating meant endurance. It meant patience. A girl might know the boy she'd marry by 12, but it would take years before they were allowed to speak freely. She'd pass him on the road to the well. He'd offer to carry her basket. They might say nothing, but everything would be said anyway. When her father finally gave permission, the boy might come to her home on Sundays, sit near the fire, speak mostly to the parents, steal glances, maybe one sentence exchanged all afternoon. But it was enough. Each visit was a building block. Toward what? No one could say. Some grew into love, others into silence, but at least there was a chance. In some regions, there were courting benches, special seats built into homes, just wide enough for two people to sit side by side, but far enough that no hands could wander. There, under the eyes of parents or siblings, couples sat, talked, listened, and dreamed, if they were lucky. It wasn't thrilling, but it was real, and it meant something, because every moment stolen from routine felt like rebellion, like magic. In some villages, courting customs were formalized. There were walking out rituals, where couples strolled through the town together with others watching, not to gossip but to approve. The way he walked, the way she smiled, it all mattered. And if things progressed, the boy might bring a small gift, not expensive, but thoughtful, a carved comb, a homemade candle, even a pair of woolen socks. Yes, socks. Practicality had its own kind of romance, especially in winter, and the girl might return the gesture by weaving a sash or stitching a name into linen. Tiny things, but they carried weight. Some communities even held mock trials where young men had to answer questions from elders to prove their intentions. Why her? What will you bring to the family? How will you provide when times are lean? There were no roses, no candlelit dinners, but there was honesty. There had to be, because life was too hard for anything else. And still, people found ways to be tender. A brush of fingers while kneading dough. A smile shared across pews. A name carved into the bark of an old tree no one would ever cut. There was poetry in those small rebellions, and beauty in restraint, in knowing that love wasn't measured by declarations, but by quiet perseverance. Now, centuries later, it's easy to laugh at the slowness of it all, at the customs, the awkward pauses, the impossibility of privacy, but there's a kind of peace in knowing that even then, long before apps and texts and date nights, people were still trying. Still risking, still dreaming, still choosing, one gesture at a time. So as you lie there now, still and safe, remember them. The girl who hid her smile behind a shawl. The boy who waited all week for one shared sentence. The couple who sat in silence, hearts pounding, on opposite sides of a bench. They're still here, in the breath between words, in the pause before sleep, in the hope that tomorrow might bring something, someone, worth watching the fire with. Let your eyes close now. Their story isn't finished, and neither is yours. There are more hearts to follow, more customs to unfold, but for tonight, let it rest, and let the old songs carry you home. Not all romance in the medieval world ended in marriage. In fact, many never even began, because so much stood in the way: class, family, church, survival. But even still, hearts wandered. Even in cloisters, even behind castle walls. Even when they knew it was foolish. Especially then. Let's step inside a monastery. Stone walls, echoing halls, chants in the dark. Here, love was forbidden. At least romantic love. At least the kind you couldn't explain. But monks and nuns were still human. They remembered. Some entered religious life because they wanted to. Others, because they had no choice. The second sons. The daughters without dowries. The ones too quiet, too poor, too inconvenient to be wed. And among these cloistered souls, affection still bloomed, through glances during prayer, through quiet conversations in the herb garden, through the way someone said your name like it mattered. Many wrote letters, confessional, poetic, wounded. Some were burned, some were hidden in the bindings of hymnals. Some survive, hundreds of years later, their words still trembling, because love, when forbidden, has sharp edges. But it also burns longer. In villages, the church also cast a heavy shadow over dating. Not just in sermons, but in rules. Premarital affection was frowned upon. Too much laughter between unmarried people was suspicious. Dancing too close was scandalous. A kiss? Unforgivable. Unless, of course, it was hidden. And so much was. behind barns, under trees, near rivers, just out of sight. The geography of love was shaped by where parents wouldn't look, where priests couldn't follow, and sometimes they got caught. Then came penance, or worse, but not always. Some parents turned blind eyes. Some priests remembered being young, because even rules have limits. And sometimes, they bent. In rare cases, lovers wrote to each other across great distances. In pilgrimages, in wars, in exile. These letters were clumsy sometimes, but filled with soul. A knight in France once wrote, "I remember your hair more than I remember the face of my king." Another, from a young woman to her absent betrothed, "If you do not return, I will carry your name into old age like a song no one else can hear." Most never saw each other again, but the letters remained. Love remained. Of course, many relationships were not about love at all. They were about property, power, politics. A noble daughter might be married to a stranger twice her age to settle a border dispute. A widow might be pressured into marrying her brother-in-law to preserve land. Feelings weren't consulted. And still, in some of these unions, affection grew. Not always, but sometimes. The way weeds bloom through stone. Uninvited, unstoppable. There were also superstitions, ways to test love, or force it. A girl might place a sprig of rosemary under her pillow on midsummer's night and dream of her future husband. A boy might carve a heart into wood and toss it into a stream. If it floated, the girl loved him. If it sank, she didn't. There were charms too. Herbs burned, words whispered, tokens buried beneath trees, little rituals meant to bend fate, to make someone look, to make someone stay. And of course, sometimes it worked. Not because of magic, but because effort matters. And attention is its own kind of spell. Even breakups had their own flavor. No messages, no blocking, just distance. A girl who stopped looking at you in church. A boy who danced with someone else at the feast. You got the message. And you moved on. Or didn't. Some hearts stayed cracked for decades. There are songs, old ones, about lovers who never wed. Who never stopped loving. Who aged apart but never stopped watching the same stars. The words change, but the ache stayed the same. Because some romances weren't meant for marriage. They were meant to be stories. Reminders that love, even when it doesn't last, is still real, still worthy, still something to be carried. Quietly. Gently. Always. There's a kind of peace in knowing that. That not every ending needs closure. That some beginnings are enough. That to love, even once, even silently, is still to live. So much of medieval romance was that, silent. And still, it shaped people, gave them comfort, lit their evenings, changed their paths. And now, centuries later, you are still shaped by those patterns. The way you look for signals. The way you save texts. The way your heart skips at the sound of a name. It's not new. It's ancient. It's shared. Close your eyes now. Let their stories wrap around yours. You don't need to understand everything. Just feel it. There are 9 more chapters to unfold. But for now, let the quiet hold you. Love has always spoken in whispers. Tonight, it speaks again. Picture 2 hands brushing by accident over a loaf of bread. No words, just that touch. In the medieval world, it could be everything. Because love was not loud. It was subtle. It had to be. One wrong move could ruin a reputation. Or a future. Or worse. And so, every courtship unfolded like a secret play, each glance, each word, perfectly measured. You might think that made romance colder. It didn't. It made it deeper. Because when you can't say everything, the things you do say matter more. In many regions, festivals became the stage for romance. May Day, harvest, saints' days, times when rules relaxed, when wine flowed, and when music made even the most cautious hearts bold. During these festivals, it was common for unmarried people to form temporary pairs. They would dance together, eat together, maybe even walk home together. Sometimes it meant nothing. Sometimes it meant everything. And the next day? You waited. Did they come to the well? Did they smile? Did they remember? That silence held weight. In rural parts of Northern Europe, there was a custom called night courting. It sounds scandalous, and sometimes it was, but often it was innocent. A young man would be allowed to visit a girl's home in the evening. He would sit at the edge of her bed, fully clothed. Both supervised or not, and they would talk. talk for hours, share stories, jokes, dreams. In places where life was hard and privacy rare, this moment meant connection. And that connection meant survival. Because you weren't just marrying a body, you were marrying a mind. A partner, someone to weather storms with. These rituals weren't just about love, they were about trust. And trust, in a world of uncertainty, was everything. In some traditions, a couple would share a single candle. As long as the flame burned, they could talk. When it went out, it was time to decide. Say yes, or say goodbye. Not all said yes, and many said goodbye with tears. Because choice was precious, rare, and often fleeting. In the upper classes, the rituals were colder, but not always less sincere. A noblewoman might receive a suitor with 3 formal bows. He would then present a gift, gloves, perfume, perhaps even a falcon feather. She might respond with a poem, or nothing. The silence would answer for her. Still, nobles, despite the layers of etiquette and politics, found ways to be human. Secret messages sewn into sleeves. Roses hidden inside books of psalms. A soft cough at a precise moment in a crowded hall. Because even in the presence of dozens of eyes, the heart still searched for one. One person who listened, who noticed, who waited just a little longer than necessary to say goodnight. In towns, apprentices and tradespeople had their own way of showing affection. A baker might slip a sweet roll into a customer's bag, free of charge. A tailor might embroider an extra flower at the hem of a dress, where only the wearer would notice. And in return, a scarf left behind, by accident. A pie baked with just the right spice. Flirtation through flower and fabric. Romance in gestures, not words. Because words were dangerous, and too many of them invited talk, gossip, suspicion, especially for women. A girl who loved too openly might be called wild. A boy who showed too much emotion might be mocked. So feelings were folded, pressed into daily life, into work, into waiting, into the spaces between tasks. That's where the real stories lived. In between. But some romances defied all caution. Some erupted like storms, fast, wild, uncontainable. A merchant's daughter who fell in love with a traveler. A knight who loved a page. A widow who swore never to marry again, until she did. The heart is not always patient. And sometimes, the risk was taken. And sometimes, it paid off. These were the stories people told for years. Whispered at firesides. Sung in ballads. Embroidered into tapestries where the figures didn't quite match the official history. But the eyes? The eyes told the truth. And that's the strange thing about medieval love. So much of it was hidden. But so much of it endured. Letters survived wars. Poems outlived plagues. Even humble carvings, initials scratched into old trees, lasted centuries. And though the people are gone, the feelings remain. Because love, even whispered, leaves echoes. And now, here you are, in your bed, in your world, different tools, same desire, to be seen, to be understood, to be wanted, to matter. You're not so far from them after all. They reached across distances. You reach across screens. They hoped for a smile in a crowd. You hope for a message in the dark. They dreamed of someone waiting at the well. You dream of someone who listens. And just like them, you wait. Patient, hopeful, uncertain, but willing. Willing to risk the heart again. Close your eyes now. Feel the hush of 1,000 old stories around you. The festival drums are quiet. The candle has burned low. The hand you brushed at the market? Gone. But the feeling? Still there. There are 8 more parts to unfold. And in them, more hearts. But tonight, let this one rest. Let it drift like a poem never finished. You'll read the next line soon. There's a moment, just before 2 people touch, when time seems to hesitate. Even in the medieval world, where so much was rushed, harvests, marriages, wars, that moment still stretched. Sweet and silent. It might happen in a church doorway. Or while picking herbs. Or beside a fire, when everyone else had gone to sleep. And in that moment, the world faded. It had to. Because love required space. Even in a crowded cottage or royal court. It needed a breath, a pause, a crack between duties. And people, then as now, found ways to make space. They carved it out with glances. With chores done together more slowly than necessary. With songs sung not quite loud enough to hear all the words. But just enough to catch the feeling. In England, In the countryside, there was a courting tradition called love spoons. A boy would carve a wooden spoon for the girl he liked. Not just functional, but beautiful. He'd etch symbols into the handle. A heart for affection, a wheel for good fortune, a key for commitment. She would accept it, or not. And if she did, it wasn't a promise, but it was a beginning. That's what courtship was, beginnings. So many beginnings. And not all led to endings. Some drifted, some faded, some flared up and were gone by the next moon. But each one left something behind. Even the smallest gesture mattered. In parts of Scandinavia, young couples would meet in secret during windows courtship. A boy would visit the girl's home after dark and talk through the shutters. It was discreet, it was dangerous, and it was romantic, because nothing feels more important than a voice you're not supposed to hear. In warmer climates, courtship moved outside, under fig trees, beside wells, anywhere with shade, with silence, with moments stolen from others' eyes. In Italy, a young man might serenade the object of his affection from the street. But if he truly cared, he would sing only part of the song. And wait, if she came to the window, he would sing the rest. If she didn't, he walked away. It sounds theatrical, and it was, because love, sometimes, is theater, but other times, it's as simple as a shared task. A man helping bring in the grain, a woman setting aside an extra crust of bread. Small mercies, tiny signals, because in a world where most people were tired, hungry, and afraid, even a gesture of kindness could feel like love. Especially then, people found beauty where they could. Pressed into routine, whispered between chores, disguised as necessity. You needed to bring the water anyway, why not walk together? You needed to mend that shirt, why not do it beside someone? Tasks turned into togetherness, and that togetherness grew into something more. Even marriage proposals had their own rhythm. Some were formal. A father approached another. Agreements were drawn. Dowries counted. Cattle discussed. But others were softer. A gift exchanged at a festival. A walk taken together in silence. An understanding. No fanfare. Just knowing. Just saying yes, without ever saying the word. Because some hearts didn't need speeches. They just needed time. And time, while hard to come by, was more meaningful than gold. If you gave someone your time, it meant everything. Now, centuries later, you give hearts by screen, by song, by symbols. It's faster, but not always clearer. The medieval lovers, poor in words but rich in watching, might have said more with one look than 1,000 emojis. Not because they were better at love, but because they had to be braver. Love was risk. It could mean shame, or banishment, or a bad match that shaped your whole life. And yet they did it. They wrote songs. They carved spoons. They visited windows. They waited at wells. They remembered, and hoped, and hurt, and tried again. You can still feel their echo now. In the way your chest tightens at a name. In the way your voice softens when you speak of someone who once meant something. In the way you wait. That hasn't changed. Because love hasn't changed. The world has. The speed, the sounds, the rules, but not the ache, not the need, and certainly not the courage. The girl who dared to smile at the wrong boy across the feast table. She's here. The boy who walked an extra mile just to glimpse her at the market. He's here, too. They walk with you. They breathe in your stories. They lie beside you now in the hush of this moment, whispering, yes, it was real. Yes, it mattered. So let yourself believe it. That your longing is ancient. That your tenderness has roots. That your hope is holy. Tonight, don't ask what happens next. Don't check the stars. Don't worry if they come back. Just rest in knowing that you've loved, or will. And when it happens, whether whispered at a window or shouted in song, it will echo. Just like it always has. Now close your eyes. We'll meet the others soon. There are 7 more stories to tell. Love wasn't always soft in the medieval world. Sometimes it was jagged, complicated, built on compromise, not chemistry. And yet, it still found ways to exist. Sometimes quietly, sometimes defiantly, sometimes in the most unexpected places. Let's start with a wedding. A small one. In a village where the air smells of earth and smoke. The groom is nervous, not because he doubts the bride, but because he barely knows her. They've spoken only a handful of times. Maybe during the wheat harvest. Maybe at church. Maybe once, in a dream, she wears a wreath of flowers. He, a wool tunic that scratches. The priest says the words. The hands are tied together, literally, wrapped in ribbon or rope. The origin of the phrase, tying the knot. And just like that, they're wed. Marriage in the Middle Ages wasn't sealed by a license. It was sealed by consent. If two people declared themselves married in front of witnesses, the church often accepted it, no need for elaborate ceremonies. And yet, ceremonies still mattered. They gave the village something to hold on to. A chance to feast, to dance, to pretend that, just for a night, love ruled everything. But love didn't always arrive on time. Some couples married for convenience and fell in love later, slowly. Like frost melting. Others never did. They shared a roof, a name, a silence. And that was it. Still others burned too brightly. Too fast. There are records of medieval couples who eloped, fled across regions, forged documents just to stay together. Some succeeded. Some were dragged home, punished, separated. But for a moment, they believed the risk was worth it. The medieval church had a complicated relationship with love. It idealized it, in theory, praised fidelity, loyalty, chastity, but it also distrusted passion. Too much emotion was dangerous. Too much desire? Even worse. So people learned to be careful. To show affection through service. Through care. Through small, repeated acts. Bringing water. Fixing a door. Sitting beside someone when they were sick. That was love. Not loud, but loyal. Still, desire simmered beneath the surface. In songs. In stories. In legends of tragic lovers, Tristan and Isolde. Lancelot and Guinevere. Romance and ruin, tangled together. People sang these tales while they worked, while they rested, while they fell in love themselves. And in those stories, they saw themselves, their hopes, their risks, their secrets. One of the most popular forms of medieval entertainment was the chanson, songs of love, loss, and longing. Traveling bards carried them from castle to cottage, turning common feelings into grand epics. A girl who missed a boy became a lady waiting by a tower. A farmhand's heartbreak became a knight's exile. These stories weren't lies. They were mirrors, slightly bent, reflecting the truth, with a little more light. Sometimes, couples exchanged tokens to mark their feelings. A ring woven from rushes. A small piece of bone carved into a charm. A scrap of cloth with initials sewn in. No diamonds, no gold, but full of meaning. Because when you have little, everything matters, even a thread. In some places, there were trial marriages, informal unions where couples lived together before making things official. This wasn't modern cohabitation. It was practical. Let's see if we survive each other. Some worked, some didn't. Either way, it was a step. And steps mattered. Because moving toward someone, especially in a world so uncertain, was brave. You didn't always know what tomorrow would bring. But if you could bring someone with you, that was enough. Love was also shaped by hardship. Plague changed everything. When the Black Death swept through Europe, millions died, communities shrank, families vanished, and suddenly, people saw time differently. Couples married faster, loved harder, laughed louder. Because when death feels close, love feels urgent. There are letters from this time, brief, desperate, beautiful. I don't care about your father's land. Just come. I will marry you even if the priest won't. Meet me before the sun rises. We'll run. Some of these ended in joy. Some in heartbreak. Some in funerals. But all of them were real. And that reality gave them weight. Not all love was between man and woman. History hides more than it reveals. But sometimes, the veil lifts. Two monks buried side by side. Hands intertwined. Letters between noblewomen, filled with longing and poetry. Stories whispered of knights who rode not for ladies, but for each other. These stories were often erased. But not always. They linger in records, in songs, in silence, and silence, sometimes, is the most honest memory of all. Because love, true love, has always existed outside of rules. It doesn't ask permission. It simply is. You don't need to know how these stories ended. Just that they happened. That someone dared. That someone reached. That someone chose love, even when the world didn't understand. And now, you lie here, in your time, in your space, with your own rules, and your own ache, and you wonder, was it simpler back then? The truth? No, it was different. Harder, in some ways. Softer, in others. But love still came. Still asked. Still stayed. So close your eyes. Let the wedding ribbons fall. Let the songs drift through the trees. Let the lovers find each other. Again and again. In the corners of your dreams. They're waiting. Just like you. 7 more stories remain. And each one holds a heart. We'll follow it soon. Love had rules. But sometimes, it broke them. And in the cracks, between duty and desire, between law and longing, real stories bloomed. Not the ones written by kings or sung by choirs. But the quiet ones. The ones carried by wind and whispered by fire. In medieval marketplaces, everything was for sale. Fish, wool, bread, and glances. The stalls bustled with voices. But sometimes a look cut through the noise like an arrow. He handed her an apple. She didn't take it. Not right away. But when she finally did, she held his fingers a moment too long. It meant nothing. And everything. Because in a world where marriage was often arranged, these moments, small, stolen, were how people made choices inside the choices made for them. In many towns, lovers found each other in guilds. The baker's apprentice and the weaver's daughter. The shoemaker's son and the candlemaker's niece. Their lives touched through trade. Hands brushed over fabric. Eyes met across flour. In shared work, they found shared rhythm. And rhythm, more than poetry, was the true language of love. Courtships could last years. Or days. Some lovers never spoke at all. Just the same road walked. The same well visited. The same prayers whispered side by side. For some, that was enough. But when speech did come, it often began with a story. A tale told over cider. A fable shared beneath a tree. Because stories were safer than feelings. You could say, once upon a time, and really mean, this is how I feel. A girl might ask a boy what kind of bird he would be. And he might answer, one that stays, and they'd both understand what that meant. Metaphor was protection, but it was also connection. And then there were love tokens. In the Northern Isles, people believed in lovers' knots, 2 strands of ribbon tied so tightly together they couldn't be undone. A boy would give one to a girl. If she returned it still knotted. It meant her heart hadn't strayed. Others used pressed herbs. Lavender for loyalty. Thyme for courage. Mint for memory. A sprig tucked into a shoe or under a pillow spoke volumes. There were games, too. In Brittany, couples played a version of truth or dare, with rhymes and riddles. If you answered wrong, you had to give a kiss or reveal a secret. Many preferred the secret. Because in medieval romance, mystery was the bait, and what was hidden always tasted sweeter. Some towns even held lovers' fairs, where for 1 day a year, people could declare their interest in someone without consequence. A chance to say, I choose you, without worrying who heard. Most declarations led nowhere, but a few led home. But love wasn't always gentle. Some were scorned, rejected, and in a world where options were few, heartbreak felt permanent. There are ballads about men who went to war to forget. Women who joined convents to escape. Hearts too bruised to try again. And still, eventually, they did. Because the world, even then, kept turning. And so did the hope. Parents played a role, too. Some supported love matches. Others didn't. A girl might be locked inside until she agreed to wed a stranger. A boy might be sent away from town to break an unworthy bond. But sometimes, love outlasted distance. Letters smuggled inside loaves of bread. Songs sung beneath windows. A promise made beside a river and remembered 20 winters later. Even arranged marriages had room for surprise. Sometimes, strangers became friends. Sometimes, friends became more. It was never guaranteed. But it happened. And when it did, it gave hope to others. Because if love could grow from arrangement, then maybe it could grow anywhere. In some regions, people wore love charms around their necks, tiny lockets with prayers for affection, protection, or fertility. Not everyone believed in them, but many wore them anyway. Because sometimes, believing is part of loving. Believing that someone will choose you. That your path, however narrow, might still cross theirs. Jealousy existed, too. There are records of lovers cursed by rivals. Of drinks spiked with herbs meant to kill desire. Of love triangles ending in duels or exile. But more often, heartbreak simply faded with time. And was replaced by someone new. or by solitude, or by the memory of what could have been. And that, too, was a kind of peace. Because not all love ends with marriage. Some ends with growth, with knowing your heart opened, even briefly, with the memory of a face lit by torchlight that no one else remembers, but you do. And always, people returned to story, to poetry, because love demanded retelling, even failed love, even quiet love, especially that, because in retelling, we make it last. And sometimes, love outlived the lovers, a couple buried side by side, hands joined, a gravestone etched with a verse known only to them, a ring passed down, worn smooth by generations. Now, centuries later, you hold your own tokens. Screens instead of ribbons, photos instead of poems. But the ache? The wonder? The silence when you wait for their reply? All of it, identical. Because love doesn't live in time. It lives in attention, in risk, in rhythm. And you, listening now, eyes heavy, are still part of the rhythm. Close them slowly. Let the lover's fair fade. Let the spoons, the herbs, the pressed ribbons fall into shadow. They'll be waiting tomorrow. And so will the rest of the story. 5 more chapters. 5 more ways the heart tried. And didn't always fail. Love was never just about the heart. In the medieval world, it was also about timing. About chance. About being in the right place, at the right festival, wearing the right shoes. Because opportunity was fleeting. And so much depended on a single glance. Or a single word. Take the story of a boy who worked in a tannery. His hands were rough. His days were long. He smelled of leather and lye. But once a week, he washed until his skin turned raw and walked past the baker's stall where a certain girl sold oatcakes. He never said more than a mumbled greeting. She never looked up for more than a second. But every week, he came. And one day, there was an oatcake wrapped in a bit of cloth, tied with thread, waiting for him. No words. Just that. That's how it began. Because beginnings were rarely dramatic. They were patient, repetitive, built on pattern. That's something people forget today. That love used to arrive slowly. You saw someone again and again. Until the shape of their shoulders became familiar. Until the sound of their footsteps made your heart stutter. And slowly, your lives braided together, not with fireworks, but with thread. In the castles, life was different, but hearts were not. A princess might never choose her husband. But she could choose to resist. Some did, subtly, by delaying answers, by stalling marriages, by asking impossible dowries. Others were more direct. They refused outright, and risked exile, or confinement, or worse. Yet, some succeeded, because sometimes, love and luck aligned. One such tale speaks of a noblewoman who refused 3 wealthy suitors. She married a scholar instead. The court mocked her, but when her father died, and the estate was nearly lost, it was her husband's knowledge that saved it. And in that act, their quiet love became legendary. Not because it was grand, but because it was earned. That's what medieval love often was. Earned. Through hardship. Through waiting. Through stubbornness. 2 people deciding, again and again, to keep choosing each other despite cold winters, hungry mouths, and village gossip. Even among the poorest, love found roots. In cottages with leaking roofs. On muddy paths. In shared loaves of bread. A woman who saved the softest crust for her husband. A man who fixed a broken chair without being asked. These were not declarations. They were devotions. And they lasted. Because when the world gave you little, you held tightly to what you had. Even if it was just a glance. Or a touch. Or a promise made beneath the stars. Many of those promises were never recorded. But some were. In diaries. In margin notes of prayer books. In the way names were written. Side by side. With careful hands. As if the ink itself could hold the bond. Lovers sometimes shared secret names. Not pet names, but names only they used for each other. As protection. As poetry. As privacy. You might not be able to call someone, beloved, in front of your family. But you could whisper a name in a language only the 2 of you spoke. And sometimes that was enough. Sometimes it was everything. Of course, not all love was tender. Some were cruel. There were forced unions, jealous rages, affairs that shattered households. But even those had their own truths. Because even flawed love is still part of the tapestry. A knight who betrayed his oath. A lady who ran away with a servant. A marriage that started with shouting and ended with laughter. All of it was real. And sometimes, the most broken stories are the most instructive. They remind us that love doesn't guarantee joy, but it does guarantee change. And in a world where little change, that alone was powerful. Religious holidays played a huge role in courtship. Easter, Pentecost, Michaelmas. These were times when the entire community gathered. When feasts were held, games played, music shared. For many young people, it was their only chance all year to see someone new. To be seen. To start something. Even if it lasted only a day. Even if it ended before the next sunrise. It was still something. And something mattered. Especially in a time when most days were the same. When life was repetition and labor. Love, however brief, was a rupture in the rhythm. A flicker. A spark. And even one spark could light the whole season. Winter was the hardest time. Cold, isolated, hungry, but also intimate, with long nights and shared fires. That's when love deepened, not because of passion, but because of presence. There's a comfort in knowing someone's breath is beside yours when the snow won't stop falling. In knowing a hand will be there when you wake. In silence. In stillness. That, too, is love. And now, you, so far away in time, are not so far in feeling. You still wait. You still wonder. You still wish for someone to choose you. Daily. Gently. And maybe you have that already. Or maybe not yet. But either way, the ache is shared. Across centuries. Across fields. Across flame. The girl who tied her love token to a lamb's horn. The boy who carved a name into bark and prayed the tree would never fall. The woman who never married but kept a piece of ribbon folded beneath her pillow until her last breath. They're all with you. Not as ghosts, but as echoes. Because love doesn't leave. It leaves traces. And in the hush of this night, those traces gather around you. Soft. Safe. True. Let them lull you. Let them remind you that nothing is wasted, not even the love that didn't last. Especially not that. There are 4 stories left. But for now, just this. Someone, somewhere, once loved like you. And that is enough. Close your eyes. We'll continue soon. There's a kind of love that never asks for attention. Never demands anything. Just sits quietly in the background. The kind of love that fills a room like the smell of bread, warm. Unnoticed, but deeply felt. In the medieval world, that kind of love was often the only kind people could afford. Because when survival was the goal, romance had to hide itself in the ordinary. A woman mending her husband's cloak with extra stitching where it always wore thin. A man waking before the rooster. Not because he had to, but because he knew the fire needed starting before she stirred. There was no time for poetry. But there was devotion. And in devotion, there was beauty. Some couples didn't fall in love until long after they were married. There are letters, surviving fragments, of women writing to their husbands on campaign. The tone changing over time. From stiff formality, to softness, to longing, to love, not because of grand gestures, but because of shared history. Shared survival. He came home. She waited. And in the waiting, something bloomed. This was especially true for peasant couples. They worked side by side. Raised children who might not survive winter. Shared griefs, joys, and tools. And in doing so, they built something stronger than infatuation. They built trust. They built knowing. They built routine, which, though it sounds dull, was the rhythm of love. A love that says, I'll carry the water today because you carried it yesterday. That was the melody behind their marriage. And sometimes, it was enough. In other places, courtship was public spectacle. Wales had its own traditions. One of the most notable? The tradition of Eisteddfod, where poets competed to write verses about love. The most moving poem could win more than applause. It could win a heart. To be able to speak love was a form of power. And those who couldn't speak it had to show it. Through actions. Through loyalty. Through waiting. Long-distance love wasn't uncommon. Men left for war. For trade. For pilgrimage. And women waited. Some of them waited years. Some, decades. There's a record of a woman in what's now Belgium who waited 17 years for her husband to return from crusade. She raised their children alone. Ran their farm. Buried her parents. And still kept a candle in the window. He came back, old. Broken. But alive. They didn't embrace. They just sat beside the hearth in silence. And in that silence, everything was said. Because love doesn't always shout. Sometimes it's just presence. And presence is sacred. The church often complicated love. Clergy preached against carnal desire. Insisted that love must be pure, chaste, holy. But even monks wrote poetry. Even nuns wept for those they couldn't name. Even saints confessed that love made them tremble. So perhaps it wasn't love they feared. Perhaps it was its power. Its ability to bend the will. To shift loyalties. To make a person cross boundaries they never dreamed of crossing. There are cases, scandalous ones, of clerics abandoning their robes for a kiss. Of abbesses eloping in the dead of night. Of confessions whispered not as penance, but as love letters. Some ended in ruin, others in legend, because the line between sin and story was always thin. And love walked it daily. But not all medieval love was tragic. Much of it was ordinary. And in that ordinariness, there was comfort. A couple who walked the same road for 40 years. Who lost children, who survived winters, who didn't always speak but always stayed. No records mention them, no bards sing their names. But they existed, and that existence matters, because most love is not lightning. It's embers, kept alive by breath and patience. And that is a kind of miracle. 2. Even children had their roles in love. Not as lovers, but as messengers. A girl might send her younger sibling with a ribbon for the boy she liked. A boy might pass a folded note to a friend to deliver at the feast. These tiny acts, awkward, sweet, were the beginning of courage. Because love, at its core, is the willingness to risk, to reach, to hope, even when you have no reason to. Even when the world tells you not to. And that risk is the same now as it was then. The tools have changed, but the fear, the flutter, the hush, all the same. You, lying here, wondering if your heart is safe, are not alone. A girl in a convent felt the same. A boy watching a festival from behind the crowd felt the same. A widow staring at the sea, waiting for a ship that may never return, felt the same. Love ties us across time. Not with chains, but with threads. And those threads are strong. They stretch from candlelit churches to your glowing screen. From carved love spoons to text messages at midnight. From songs sung on horseback to playlists shared online. And always, they carry the same message. I see you. I choose you. I hope you choose me. 2. Close your eyes now. Let those threads wrap gently around you. Not to bind, but to comfort. You are part of a longer story than you know. And it's not over yet. 3 more parts remain, each one a quiet heartbeat. We'll follow them soon. The farther back you go, the more fragile love seems. And yet, somehow, it lasted. Through war, through famine, through walls built by others. Love found cracks. It always does. In the medieval world, a promise wasn't sealed with a ring so much as with a vow. Sometimes spoken, sometimes whispered, sometimes never said out loud at all. But kept. That's the difference. A knight riding off to war might not see the woman he loved for years, if ever. But he would carry a token. A lock of her hair. A ribbon. A handkerchief folded into his armor. Not for magic. Not for luck. But to remind himself who he was fighting for. Because in a world filled with chaos, love offered clarity. A reason. A purpose. A thread to follow home. Back in the villages, those left behind waited. Women tended farms. Raised children. Wrote prayers into the seams of clothing. Some never heard again from the ones they loved. But they kept waiting anyway. Because love, real love, does not measure itself by outcome. It simply is. Even when it's unanswered. Even when it's unfinished. The troubadours knew this. They traveled from town to town. Castle to castle. Singing songs of impossible love. A shepherd who dreamed of a noblewoman. A queen who longed for a servant. A girl who loved the sea more than any suitor. These stories weren't always hopeful. But they were always human. And in every crowd, someone heard their own heart echoed back in those verses. That was the power of love stories. Not that they solved anything. But that they reminded people they weren't alone. In the Baltic lands, it was common for couples to exchange belts as a symbol of commitment. Not for wealth, not for show, just a simple cloth or leather belt. Worn close to the body, close to the heart. It meant, I am yours, even when I'm not here. It meant, I will return, if I can. Sometimes they didn't, but the belt stayed, hung near the door, folded in a chest, a quiet relic of a promise made in better times. Courtship customs changed with geography. In parts of the Alps, couples would go on long walks together, hours through the hills, accompanied by younger siblings to chaperone. The siblings would pretend not to hear, and the couple would pretend not to say too much. But in those quiet steps, among pine trees and echoes, truths were spoken. I would build you a house. I would carry your grief. I would find joy in your silence. Not poetry, exactly, but close. Elsewhere, in ports and towns, sailors and merchants fell in love fast. Because time was short, a week in port, a few stolen nights, sometimes that was all it took. And sometimes, it led to letters, to reunions, to marriages that bridged oceans and dialects and distance. But not always. Many hearts were broken on shorelines. And many stories ended with a wave. Still, people loved anyway. Because to not love, out of fear, was its own kind of heartbreak. And people were brave. Braver than history remembers. There were forbidden loves, too. Between faiths. Between social classes. Between people whose families were sworn enemies. Some of these stories ended in tragedy. Others in exile. But a few, just a few, ended in peace. In two people saying, let's go somewhere new. And beginning again. You see, medieval dating wasn't just about marriage. It was about connection. About finding someone who heard you, saw you, stood beside you when no one else did. Even if only for a season. Even if only in secret. Even that was something sacred. Because when your world is small, one heart beside yours can feel like a universe. And many lived inside that universe for a while. There were even traditions of love sickness. Yes, actual diagnosis. Doctors believed too much longing could cause real illness. Rapid heartbeat, melancholy, insomnia. They prescribed herbs, cold compresses, prayers. Some said the only cure was to see the person again, or to forget them completely. Neither was easy, but it shows just how seriously people took the feeling. Love wasn't a distraction. It was a condition, sometimes blissful, sometimes unbearable, but never ignored. In monasteries, where vows of chastity ruled, love took strange forms. A glance held too long to inquire. A flower left near someone's seat. A letter copied into the margin of a holy text. Some monks confessed to their feelings. Some never did, but the ache was real. It echoed in the stone. And centuries later, it still lingers. Because love doesn't need permission to exist. It just exists. You don't need to believe in soulmates to understand that. You just need to have waited for someone. Even once. Even for an hour. Then you know. You understand the breathlessness of not knowing. The sharp joy of being seen. The comfort of a name spoken softly. These things haven't changed. They never will. Tonight, as you listen to these words, you carry their stories with you. The baker's son who waited every Sunday at the same corner. The noblewoman who chose silence over safety to keep a secret love alive. The girl who never married, but smiled every time the wind shifted, because it reminded her of him. They're not forgotten. You remember them now. In your heartbeat. In your longing. In your dreams. And maybe someone will remember you someday. Too. Not because you were famous. But because you loved well. Because you waited kindly. Because you believed. Even when it hurt. That's what matters. That's what lasts. Two parts remain. But tonight, this part is enough. Let the old songs quiet. Let the belts rest on the shelf. Let your eyes fall shut. Slowly. There's more ahead. But for now, just this moment. Just this warmth. Just this knowing. You are not alone in your hope. And you never were. Some love stories never made it into the songs. They were too soft. Too simple. Too ordinary. But sometimes, ordinary is the most extraordinary thing of all. Like a shepherd who brought the same girl a handful of wildflowers every time the sheep passed near her field. He never said why. She never asked. But she kept them, pressed in a book of Psalms. Years later, after he was gone, her granddaughter found them and asked, "What are these?" She smiled, and said nothing, because some love doesn't need retelling. It just needs remembering. In the medieval world, much of love's power came from what wasn't said. What was left unsaid was just as meaningful as the loudest vow. A shared silence could hold 1,000 promises. A walk taken together without a word could speak more than a feast day poem. This was a time before constant noise. Before instant replies. When waiting was a virtue. Not an inconvenience. When letters took months, or never came at all. And yet, people still believed in love. Still waited. Still watched. A girl might climb a hill every morning just to see if a boat had returned. A boy might spend his last coin on a scarf, just because she admired the color once in passing. These acts weren't recorded in the history books, but they lived on in memory. In lace patterns that mimicked the folds of a favorite dress. In folk songs sung without names, but full of feeling. In lullabies passed down through families who had long forgotten their origin. And so many of these stories never truly ended. They just stopped, because someone moved away, or married another, or fell silent. That silence, too, was a kind of ending. One that left space for ache, but also for growth. People learned to live with love that didn't last. And in doing so, they made peace with it. They learned that love wasn't always about having. Sometimes, it was simply about knowing. Knowing that once, just once, someone saw you. Really saw you. And maybe smiled. In some villages, it was tradition to place a carved heart on the door of a house when two people got engaged. Not for show, for protection. As if to say, this love lives here. Let no ill pass through. Some were stolen in the night. Some were burned. But most stayed, weathered by wind and rain, but still visible, just like the love inside. There were other symbols, too. A ring made from straw. A song sung in secret. A loaf of bread shaped like a pair of joined hands. None were valuable, but all were priceless, because they carried intention. And intention, in love, is everything. There were stories of love that crossed lines never meant to be crossed. Between master and servant, between prisoner and guard, between enemy clans. And in each of these stories, someone had to choose bravery over comfort. Had to believe that love was worth the cost. Sometimes it wasn't. Sometimes it led to ruin. But other times, it led to peace, to change, to something new being born out of something forbidden. Even nature was part of romance. Birdsong was said to be a good omen if heard during a first kiss. Rain on the day of a proposal meant the bond would last. The flowering of certain herbs in the garden meant love was near. These signs weren't superstition, they were hope, made visible. And people needed hope, because life was hard. Bodies were tired, futures uncertain. Love was the small fire that made it bearable. Even the clergy, so often removed from romance, understood this. Some preached against lust, but others quietly supported young lovers. They offered blessings, looked the other way, wrote letters for those who could not write. Because even holy men and women knew that love, at its best, was not a sin, but a sanctity. Even if the rules said otherwise. Many people carried their first loves with them forever. Even after marrying someone else. Even after decades. There are accounts of widows burying small tokens with their spouses. Tokens from someone else. Long gone. Not out of betrayal. Out of honesty. Because one heart can carry more than one name. And still remain true. Now, centuries later, our tokens are different. Photos. Messages. Memories saved in sound and pixels. But the feeling? The feeling hasn't changed. You still pause when a certain name appears. You still feel your chest warm when someone remembers a small detail. You still wonder if they feel it too. You still hope. And hope is love's truest echo. It lives longer than longing. Longer than loss. It survives. In dreams. In footsteps. In the quiet wish you make when no one is watching. That wish? Someone, long ago, made it too. And someone, long from now, will make it again. That's what binds us. Not blood. Not nation. Not name. But love. And its infinite forms. Romantic. Familial. Fleeting. Fierce. All of it matters. All of it lingers. Tonight, let it soften your breath. Let it cradle your thoughts. Let it remind you that no act of love is wasted. Even the smallest. Even the most forgotten. Especially those. Close your eyes. There's one more part to tell. One more story to carry you across centuries. We'll arrive soon. But for now, just rest in this truth. You have loved. You are loved. And somewhere, someone remembers. At the end of every story, there's a quiet. Not because the tale is over, but because something in us wants to hold on to the last word. Just a little longer. Tonight, we end not with a grand romance or tragic parting, but with something gentler. The everyday love. The kind that stayed. It begins in a small cottage on the edge of a wood. A man rises before the sun. His joints ache. His hair is gray. He stokes the fire with slow hands and puts on a pot of water. His wife of 42 years is still sleeping. She'll wake soon, and he'll pretend he didn't burn the oats again. She'll scold him softly, then smile. This is what love becomes when it's no longer trying to prove itself. It simply is. Quiet, durable, known. In the medieval world, few people lived long enough to celebrate decades together. But those who did, they became part of the landscape. Neighbors stopped asking about their bond. Children watched them like weather, reliable, ever present. They weren't called romantic, but they were revered. Because love that endures is rarer than love that begins. And in the way he wrapped her shawl before she stepped outside. In the way she packed his tools just right. In the way their steps matched without trying. There was romance. More than all the sonnets. More than all the stolen kisses at fairs. There were also the friendships that turned to love. 2 girls who shared a bench at mass. 2 boys who worked side by side mending thatch. They never intended it, but one day, the silence between them shifted. Felt warmer. And from then on, they were simply together. No announcements. Just presence. And those around them knew. They always knew. The medieval world didn't have the words for every kind of love. But people felt it anyway. And they made room for it. Sometimes in secret, but always with care. There were widows who never remarried. Not out of grief, but because they loved their freedom. There were second marriages that healed what the first ones broke. There were people who found love late, when no one expected it. And in every case, it was real. It mattered. One woman, long ago, was buried with 2 rings. One from her husband, and one from someone else. No one knows who. But the fact that both were there means both were important. Both were honored. Because love leaves traces in stone. In fabric. In memory. In the way someone's name lingers in a family. Even when no one remembers quite why. You are the continuation of those stories. You carry their courage, their hope, their ache. When you pause before sending a message. When your breath catches hearing a favorite song. When you remember someone who made you feel more alive. You become the next verse in the oldest poem. Because love didn't start with you. But it continues through you. And that is beautiful. Even if it's quiet. Even if no one else sees it. Even if it doesn't end the way you hoped. It is still real. Still worthy. Still sacred. So as you lie here now, think of them. The girl who waited at the gate. The boy who carved initials into stone. The mother who tucked a letter inside her daughter's traveling cloak. The man who whispered a name every night before sleep. Long after she was gone. They are not dust. They are not forgotten. You've brought them back tonight. With your listening. With your longing. With your open heart. And maybe, somewhere, they're grateful. Maybe they whisper back, thank you. Because all they ever wanted was to be remembered. And now they are. Through you. This series began with flirtations in fields. Tokens tied in thread. Windows cracked open at midnight. But it ends here. In stillness. In peace. In the soft understanding that love, in all its forms, brief, burning, broken, bold, is what connects us across time. You don't need more proof. You only need to close your eyes. Let their stories rest with yours. Let the heart slow. Let the past settle into place. The lovers of old are quiet now. Their messages delivered. Their names safe in your thoughts. You are the archive, the witness, the final chapter, but not the end. Because love will rise again tomorrow. In someone's look. In someone's laughter. In someone's choice to say yes. When it would be easier to say nothing. Let that be your lullaby. Not a melody, but a memory. Not a dream, but a continuation. Now sleep. And if you dream, may it be of wildflowers tied with ribbon. Of footsteps echoing in moonlight. Of someone waiting with a heart open as yours. Good night, dreamer. You've heard the old songs. Now carry them gently. And write your own.